The sun dipped behind the Seattle skyline, painting the city in hues of orange and red. The bustling streets below pulsed with life, but in the corner booth of a quiet cafe, Evelyn Blake sat nervously fidgeting with her wedding ring. Her hands trembled as she stared at the man across from her, Victor Langston, a wealthy developer known for his ambition and cunning. Victor leaned forward, his voice smooth. "Evelyn, I'm not here to judge. You reached out to me. I can help." Evelyn swallowed hard, glancing at the papers in front of her. Foreclosure notices, overdue mortgage payments, and bank statements that detailed the slow unraveling of her family's finances. She thought of her husband, Tom. Honest to a fault, hardworking, but stuck in a job that couldn't keep them afloat. "Why me?" she asked quietly. Victor's smile was calculated, a mixture of charm and danger. "Because you're worth it." Evelyn's heart pounded as she considered the weight of the unspoken deal hanging between them. Across town, Tom Blake was finishing up his shift at the mechanic shop. He wiped his hands on a rag and smiled when his phone buzzed with a text from Evelyn. "Dinner will be ready at 7. Love you." He texted back quickly, "Can't wait. Love you too." Tom didn't know how bad things had become. Evelyn had shielded him from the truth, desperate to spare him the burden of their debt. That night, as they sat together at the dinner table, Evelyn tried to hide her anxiety behind small talk about Harper, their 6-year-old daughter who was still learning how to ride her bike. Tom reached for Evelyn's hand. "You okay?" he asked, his eyes full of warmth and concern. Evelyn forced a smile. "Just tired." Tom nodded. "We'll figure everything out. We always do." Evelyn's chest tightened with guilt. She nodded but couldn't bring herself to meet his gaze. In the following weeks, Evelyn found herself drawn deeper into Victor's web. What began as desperate financial advice soon evolved into secret meetings at lavish restaurants and luxury hotels. Each time, Victor reminded her of the stakes. "You're saving your family, Evelyn," he would whisper, his touch lingering. Evelyn convinced herself that what she was doing was noble, a necessary evil. But deep down, she knew she was crossing lines she'd never imagined. Tom noticed the changes. Evelyn's late nights, her distant glances, the way she tensed when her phone buzzed. He tried to brush it off as stress, but a gnawing doubt began to grow. One night, as Evelyn stood by the window lost in thought, Tom wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Whatever it is, you can tell me," he murmured. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, but she stayed silent. The following morning, Tom found an envelope tucked into one of Evelyn's drawers. It was a receipt for a luxury hotel room with Victor Langston's name scrawled on it. Tom's heart stopped. The realization crashed over him like a wave. The late nights, the unexplained absences, it all made sense now. He sat on the edge of their bed, the weight of betrayal pressing down on him. Rage simmered beneath his shock, but above all, there was a devastating sorrow. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting long beams across the bed where Tom sat, still clutching the damning receipt. His mind raced, emotions clashing in a whirlwind, confusion, heartbreak, fury. The man whose name was scrawled on the paper wasn't just anyone. Victor Langston had been a prominent figure in the neighborhood, a man with a reputation for having everything and wanting more. Tom didn't confront Evelyn right away. He couldn't, not until he was sure he could handle her answers. Instead, he spent the next few days observing, pretending everything was normal, though inside, he was unraveling. Evelyn moved through her day on autopilot, haunted by guilt. She knew that every time she smiled at Tom, every time Harper curled up beside her on the couch, she was lying to them. The weight of her choices crushed her. Victor, however, continued to play his part with ease. His texts came at all hours. "We need to meet. I'm making progress on the refinancing. You're doing the right thing." His words wrapped around her like a tightening rope. That evening, Evelyn arrived home after one of her meetings with Victor. She placed her purse on the kitchen counter and took a deep breath before calling out, "I'm home." Tom appeared from the hallway, a forced smile on his face. "Hey." Evelyn kissed his cheek, but the warmth she once felt wasn't there. She busied herself with dinner, feeling Tom's gaze linger on her back. A week later, Tom made the decision to take matters into his own hands. He left work early and parked near the downtown office where Victor operated. He watched as people came and went, their lives oblivious to the storm raging in his. Finally, he spotted Victor stepping out of the glass doors, adjusting his designer coat. The man's confidence radiated from every step he took. Tom's grip on the steering wheel tightened. His instinct screamed for confrontation, but he resisted, barely. Instead, he followed Victor at a distance, his heart pounding. The path led him to an upscale restaurant. Through the wide windows, Tom saw Victor sitting at a table. Moments later, Evelyn walked in. Tom's world shattered all over again. The restaurant glowed with soft light, the hum of conversations blending with the clink of wine glasses. Evelyn hesitated by the entrance before joining Victor. "You look tense," Victor said, pouring her a glass of wine. "Because I am," Evelyn muttered. "I hate this." Victor's smile didn't waver. "This isn't forever. You'll be free of this debt soon." Evelyn clenched her hands. "And at what cost?" Victor leaned closer, lowering his voice. "At the cost of keeping your family safe." Tears pricked Evelyn's eyes, but she nodded. She was in too deep to turn back. Tom sat in his car, watching the scene unfold. His breath came in shallow gasps as rage and betrayal coursed through him. He stayed until he saw them leave, his vision blurred with emotion. That night, he didn't return home. Instead, he drove aimlessly through the city, trying to process what he had seen. He parked by the waterfront and stared at the dark waves lapping at the shore. The next morning, Tom returned home, exhausted and hollow. Evelyn was in the kitchen, sipping coffee. She looked up, surprised. "Where were you?" she asked, concern in her eyes. Tom forced himself to stay calm. "Just needed to clear my head." Evelyn nodded, though unease flickered across her face. As Tom walked past her, he whispered, "I know." Evelyn froze, the coffee cup trembling in her hand. "What?" Tom turned, his gaze piercing. "I know everything, Evelyn." The silence that followed was deafening. Evelyn's world spun as Tom's words settled into the air. "I know everything." The coffee cup slipped from her trembling fingers, shattering against the tile floor. The sound echoed through the quiet house. "Tom, I can explain," Evelyn whispered, her voice fragile. Tom's face was calm, too calm, masking the storm beneath. "Explain what, exactly? The hotel? The lies? Or how you've let him buy pieces of our life?" Evelyn clutched the counter for support. "It wasn't like that." Tom stepped closer, his eyes blazing. "Then tell me what it was, Evelyn." She opened her mouth but couldn't form the words. The truth was an unbearable weight pressing down on her. "I was trying to fix things." Tom's laugh was bitter and sharp. "By betraying me?" Tears streamed down Evelyn's face. "We were drowning in debt, Tom. I didn't know what else to do." Tom's voice cracked, his anger giving way to heartbreak. "So you sold us out to Victor Langston? Him? He's been sitting at our table, shaking my hand, all while you've been meeting him behind my back." Evelyn sobbed, collapsing onto a chair. "I didn't want to hurt you. I thought I was protecting our family." Tom slammed his fist against the counter, making her flinch. "Protecting us? You've destroyed us." The silence stretched, broken only by the sound of the clock ticking. Harper's voice suddenly called out from her room upstairs. "Mommy? Daddy?" Evelyn wiped her face quickly. "Stay here," Tom muttered before heading up to Harper's room. He found her sitting up in bed, clutching her stuffed animal. "What's wrong, sweetie?" he asked, his voice softening. Harper looked up at him, her eyes wide. "I heard yelling. Are you and Mommy mad?" Tom's heart sank. He forced a reassuring smile. "No, sweetheart. We're just talking about grown-up things." Harper hugged her stuffed bear tighter. "Okay." Tom kissed her forehead. "Go back to sleep. Everything's going to be okay." As he left the room and closed the door gently behind him, his resolve hardened. When he returned to the kitchen, Evelyn hadn't moved. She looked up, broken and vulnerable. "What happens now?" she asked. Tom exhaled slowly, sitting across from her. "That depends on you." Her voice trembled. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." Tom stared at her for a long moment. "You can't undo this, Evelyn. You slept with him to save the house, But you've cost us something far more important, trust. Evelyn buried her face in her hands. Please, Tom. Tom stood, his voice low but steady. I need time and space. For Harper's sake, I'll stay civil. But we're done pretending. The following days were an unbearable limbo. Tom moved into the guest room and avoided any unnecessary conversation with Evelyn. The house felt like a hollow shell of what it had once been. Evelyn spent her nights staring at the ceiling, haunted by memories of happier times and the mistakes that had led her here. One evening, she opened her phone and stared at Victor's name in her contact list. Her finger hovered over the screen before she finally pressed block. It was over. Tom, however, wasn't done seeking closure. He met with a lawyer to discuss his options. The lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Caroline Mills, listened carefully before nodding. You have grounds for divorce, she said. But if you want custody arrangements to go smoothly, we'll need a clear strategy. Tom's jaw tightened. I'm not trying to take Harper away from her. I just want what's best for my daughter. Caroline nodded. Then let's make sure you're protected. That weekend, Tom took Harper to the park. She laughed as she raced down the slide and ran toward him with rosy cheeks. Daddy, watch me, she called as she climbed the monkey bars. Tom smiled, clapping for her. For a moment, the weight of everything lifted, and he felt the purity of fatherhood, uncomplicated and full of love. Meanwhile, Evelyn sat alone in their empty living room, surrounded by framed photos of memories she'd ruined. She knew Tom's departure was inevitable. The only question left was how much of their life she could salvage. The sound of Tom's car starting early the next morning echoed through the quiet house. Evelyn sat at the dining table, staring at the untouched cup of coffee in front of her. The emptiness inside her felt like a chasm, deep, cold, and unrelenting. Upstairs, Harper rubbed her eyes as she stepped out of her room. Where's Daddy? She asked, her voice small. Evelyn forced a smile, though her heart ached. He had some errands to run, sweetie. He'll be back soon. Harper's shoulders slumped. Are you still mad at each other? Evelyn crouched down and pulled her daughter into a hug. Daddy and I love you very much. Don't ever forget that. Harper nodded, but didn't look convinced. Tom drove aimlessly through the city, the radio playing softly in the background. He ended up at the waterfront, parking near the same spot where he had sat the night he found out the truth. The early morning air was crisp, carrying the smell of salt and damp pavement. He pulled out his phone and opened the message thread with Caroline, his lawyer. Her words rang in his mind. You need to make the next move on your terms. Tom inhaled deeply and sent a simple message. Let's move forward. Evelyn was folding laundry when her phone buzzed with a notification. Her breath caught as she saw the subject line. Notice of legal proceedings. The legal jargon blurred in her vision, but the message was clear. The divorce was officially underway. She sank onto the bed, the pile of clothes forgotten. Tears welled up as the finality of it all settled over her. That evening, Harper's laughter rang out as she watched her favorite cartoon, but Evelyn barely heard it. She forced herself to smile when Harper showed her a silly scene, but felt like a spectator in her own life. A knock at the door broke the stillness. Evelyn's heart leapt, hoping for Tom. Instead, she found Brianna, her oldest friend, standing on the porch with a bag of takeout and a concerned expression. I figured you could use some company, Brianna said. Evelyn stepped aside, her voice weak. Thanks. They sat at the dining table in silence for a while before Brianna finally spoke. Is this really the end? Evelyn wiped her eyes. I don't see how it can be anything else. Brianna reached for her hand. You're not alone. Tom's temporary apartment was small but tidy, filled with the bare essentials. He hung up photos of Harper to make it feel more like home. On the weekends she stayed with him. Her laughter filled the space, making it feel warmer than it was. One evening, as Harper colored at the kitchen table, she asked, Will Mommy ever come visit? Tom paused before answering, his voice steady. Probably not, sweetie, but we'll always be here for you. Harper nodded solemnly. I wish things were like before. Tom felt the familiar sting in his chest. Me too. Meanwhile, Evelyn began attending counseling sessions, desperate to understand the choices that had led her to this point. Her therapist, Dr. Martinez, listened patiently as Evelyn recounted the story from the beginning. "I thought I was saving us," Evelyn whispered, "but I was only destroying us." Dr. Martinez nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes, in trying to protect what we love, we lose sight of the damage we're doing." Evelyn's tears flowed freely. "I don't know who I am anymore." "That's where we start," Dr. Martinez said softly. The day of the court hearing arrived. Evelyn sat alone on one side of the courtroom, clutching a tissue in her hand. Tom walked in, his expression calm but unreadable. They avoided each other's eyes as the proceedings began. The judge's words felt distant, drowned out by the weight of everything they'd lost. When the final decree was issued, Evelyn felt the last thread holding their marriage together snap. Tom walked past her on his way out, pausing briefly. "Take care of yourself, Evelyn." She blinked back tears. "You too." Life after the divorce settled into a new, bittersweet normal. Tom poured himself into his role as a father, attending every soccer game and school event. Harper thrived despite the changes, her resilience a testament to the love she received. Evelyn focused on rebuilding. She took a part-time job at a local community center, helping families navigate financial hardship, a cause she knew all too well. Slowly, she began to reclaim her identity. One afternoon, while Harper was at Tom's, Evelyn sat at a cafe reading a book. She looked up as the barista called out an order and saw a family laughing together at a nearby table. The sight filled her with a mix of sadness and hope. Months passed, and though Evelyn and Tom lived separate lives, their shared commitment to Harper remained unshaken. On Harper's birthday, they stood side by side at her party, clapping as she blew out the candles. For a fleeting moment, things felt whole. As they cleaned up after the party, Evelyn handed Tom a plate of leftover cake. "Thank you for being here." Tom gave her a small nod. "It's about Harper. It always will be." That night, Evelyn sat on her porch, wrapped in a blanket as the stars blinked overhead. The mistakes she'd made would haunt her, but she was learning to live with them rather than be defined by them. In his apartment, Tom watched Harper sleep peacefully, her stuffed bear clutched in her arms. He exhaled slowly, the weight on his shoulders lighter than it had been in months. Though their marriage had ended, their story hadn't. It had simply changed. The morning after Harper's birthday party, life settled into a quiet routine. The weight of the divorce no longer felt like an open wound, but a dull ache, constant but bearable. Yet, there were moments that still caught Evelyn off guard. An empty chair at the breakfast table, an old anniversary card she'd forgotten to throw away. At the community center, Evelyn's work became more than just a job. It became her way of atonement. She helped struggling families navigate debts, sharing her own hard-earned lessons without revealing all the personal details. One afternoon, as she packed up her things after a workshop, a familiar voice called her name. "Evelyn." She turned and felt her stomach drop. Victor Langston stood near the entrance, looking sharp as ever in a tailored suit. The sight of him made her pulse quicken, not with attraction, but with unease. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice colder than she'd expected. Victor smiled, though his charm had lost its shine. "I heard about the divorce. I just wanted to check in." Evelyn crossed her arms. "There's nothing to check in on. I'm rebuilding my life." Victor took a step closer, his voice low. "I didn't force you into anything, Evelyn. You came to me." "I made mistakes," Evelyn shot back. "But trusting you was the worst one." Victor's face hardened, but he stepped back, raising his hands in mock surrender. "I hope you find what you're looking for." Evelyn watched as he walked away, disappearing into the city crowd. She exhaled slowly, feeling as though she'd closed the door on a chapter of her life that should have ended long ago. Tom's life had taken on a new simplicity. He found comfort in his routines, weekend soccer games with Harper, early morning runs by the lake, and quiet evenings spent reading. He'd even reconnected with old friends who had drifted away during the turmoil. One evening, after Harper's swim practice, she climbed into the car, her face glowing with excitement. "Coach said I might get moved up to the next level." Harper beamed. Tom grinned. "That's amazing, Harper. I'm so proud of you." As they drove home, Harper asked a question that caught Tom off guard. "Do you think Mommy's happy?" Tom hesitated. I think she's trying to be. Harper nodded thoughtfully. I hope she is. I want you both to be happy. Tom felt his heart squeeze. We're working on it, kiddo. One weekend, during a rare quiet evening alone, Evelyn found herself sitting in front of her old wedding photo album. She traced the edges of the pictures, remembering the way Tom had looked at her on their wedding day, with absolute trust. The pain of betrayal and loss was still there, but it had dulled into something she could bear. She knew she would carry the weight of her choices forever, but she had finally accepted that forgiveness, from Tom, from Harper, and especially from herself, would take time. Months later, Tom and Evelyn found themselves standing side by side at Harper's school play. She stood on the stage in her homemade costume, her voice clear and confident as she delivered her lines. When the play ended, the auditorium erupted in applause. Harper's face lit up as she spotted her parents clapping in unison. After the performance, Harper ran to them, her excitement bubbling over. Did you see? I didn't forget a single word. Tom scooped her up, laughing. You were perfect. Evelyn kissed Harper's cheek. We're so proud of you. For a moment, they stood together, a fractured family bound by love for their daughter. As the years passed, life took them in different directions. Tom accepted a promotion at work that allowed him to travel, but ensured he never missed Harper's important moments. Evelyn continued her work at the community center, eventually leading financial literacy programs that changed lives. Victor Langston became nothing more than a distant memory, a cautionary tale she never shared but always remembered. Harper grew into a strong, thoughtful young woman, shaped by her parents' unwavering love despite their differences. On the night of Harper's high school graduation, Tom and Evelyn sat on either side of her at dinner, sharing stories and laughter. The scars of the past remained, but they no longer dictated their lives. As the evening wound down, Evelyn raised her glass. To Harper, our greatest achievement. Tom smiled and lifted his glass. To Harper. Harper laughed, her eyes shining. To both of you. Later that night, Evelyn sat on her porch, watching the stars. The mistakes she'd made would always be a part of her, but they no longer defined her. In his own home, Tom stood by Harper's old room, now decorated with college memorabilia. He felt an overwhelming sense of peace, proof that while life didn't always turn out the way they'd planned, it had still led them somewhere meaningful. Though their love story had ended, their shared story as a family endured. End of story.